So we spoke about financing the unorganized sector and skilling the unorganized sector in the earlier session. We spoke about Prime Minister Modi's Skill India campaign. After Skill India, can Digital India be far behind? The unorganized sector offers technology companies a unique challenge and an opportunity. To speak about what this opportunity means and how best to utilize it, we have with us today Mr. Sumit Ganguli, CEO of GAVS Technologies. Mr. Sumit wears multiple hats. He's an electrical engineer and a management graduate from IIM Calcutta. He also has an advanced professional certificate from Stern School of Management, New York University. He's an adjunct professor at Rutgers State University and teaches international business. Um, GAVS Technologies is also the associate sponsor for Sammantaran. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Sumit Ganguli.
We seem to have lost some audience, but we'll make do with what we have. Uh, my background really is right now I'm a general partner with a private equity firm called Basil Partners, and we've invested in GAVS Technologies and few other technology companies, and that's how I'm running GAVS, and I'm on the board of a few other companies. And I've been an adjunct at Rutgers teaching international business. I was here addressing the EPGP group, and I kind of felt a lot of kinship. And when I spoke with Professor R. Srinivasan, and he talked about Sammantaran, I thought it'd be a lovely forum to kind of do a little exchange of ideas. I've been out of the country for the last 27, 26 years. I live in Princeton, New Jersey. So definitely it's a little bit of a far cry for me to immediately try and wax eloquent on the unorganized sector. Having said that, as a leader and someone who's been working with various IT companies, one of the key things that we're really trying to do is create a disruption. When I talk of disruption, I don't talk about breaking the law. I generally think, please don't be under the advisement and break the law, and don't take that literally. Having said that, and especially when you are from the US, governance and within the framework of law is extremely, extremely important. So I just couldn't help but kind of highlight that. So what I really thought I'll do today is walk you through verbally some of my thought process. What is it that I'm trying to do within the organization and organizations, and how I'm challenging them to look at things differently. And in the process, digitization in the unorganized sector is governed by very key things. Number one, of course, low cost, ubiquity of technology, ease of operation, easy adoption. Those are, again, things that we really want to do. And I'll be honest, as a technologist, and as they say, you can take the boy out of the country, can't take the country out of the boy, I often feel a little jealous that I'm perpetually using Twitter. I took the Uber to come in here. I'm talking about Facebook. I have Mr. Modi decides that the most important forum is in Silicon Valley to kind of promote his cases. It's extremely important that we do something very unique out of here. We do have our Olas and we have the Baba jobs, but all of them are largely replicas of Ola being an Uber or something else. At least in China, Alibaba and a few of the other ones have a different take on the Yahoos and the others of the world. Yeah? So that's really where I am. And I saw a lot of commonality. And I thought, you as business leaders, I did not want to adopt a kind of a pedagogue or a telling you what is happening and do a collective sigh. I'm a rational optimist. And I thought, what is it that's important for you guys? What are your global objectives? Which should be very similar to those of mine. And can we jointly kind of walk through this and use them as a trigger to change our life aspiration? That's really the objective. Digitization in the unorganized sector really does not need too much of waxing eloquent. The Arab Spring, the role of Twitter, the role of Facebook, the role of overall digital in kind of course, what it turned out to be is very different, but no one can really deny the fact that there was a decided impact of digitization in the unorganized sector. A small little story. We just had a client event at Phoenix where I had invited 40 CEOs and CIOs. And I had also invited this gentleman, and some of you may YouTube him, called Alingon Mitro. Alingon is a graduate from Harvard, and he tells his parents were happy, but I don't know. He decided to be a stand-up comedian. So after Harvard, he's a stand-up comedian now, and I had invited him to address the group. And he had an interesting take. One of them observation was, and this is relevant to what we are saying, and a little bit of levity here. He said, there's an observation that almost 80% of men, I repeat, almost 80% of men watch pornography. So his conclusion was, that means 20% of men do not have internet connection. So digitization, the way we know it, is absolutely out there. And this aspect of helping or enabling or supporting the unorganized, or what they call bottom of the pyramid, has been going on since 1931. This is an interesting quote by Franklin D. Roosevelt. He had a radio address sometime in 1931. He had this topic called the Forgotten Man, and he again talks about this important aspect of the unorganized sector, which continues to be an indispensable part of the economy, and we ought to do something to be an enabler there. And now I thought every one of us here as students of management definitely want to leave a legacy behind. Again, being in America, I have become a very strong believer of motivation. Be it in some way or form Maslow's need hierarchy, be it classic monetary incentive. I personally think, to be more relevant here, all of us would like to be like one of those. Of course, they are old white men, but the fact that we still know some of them. Just a little quiz. Any one of you would know who's this? All of them actually revolutionized through easy, affordable products. And if you have half a chance of addressing the unorganized sector, these are the key imperatives and drivers that we need to look at. That was Henry Ford. He revolutionized car industry with his Model T, largely because of price. Therefore, it was not really a high-end transport device. It was something that a common man can use. Vanderbilt, some of you may know of Vanderbilt jeans, but Cornelius Vanderbilt was largely known because he really reduced the cost of rail. And therefore, the east and the west of America could be connected. And a lot of it in India as well had a lot to do with the overall railroad industry that was absolutely made affordable. And of course, Andrew Carnegie, he kind of brought steel price down by almost 75%. And an interesting part is when the low-cost steel and low-cost locomotive came together, you had the railroad. Why I highlight here is every one of us as business leaders of present or future, we need to be perpetually be driven by how could we make a disruption. And I'll give a little contrapoint here. And I was speaking at Princeton, and a whole host of people didn't like what I said. But I felt sometime that the Indian IT industry has done some disservice to development and invention because we're perpetually looking at low-cost alternatives. We had the whole Y2K scenario, which is the year 2000, where the Chicken Little was saying that the cloud or the sky will fall, and we were able to throw low-cost bodies at every problem. Instead of that, if you were really look at if we have to really address the unorganized sector, and we had a whole host of people speaking very passionately about it, but if we as IT leaders really need to look at digitization in the unorganized sector, we really need to look at this a little rebellious. Huh? we need to look at these imperatives. And this is what I'm focusing on in our organizations as well. Some of you may have seen a little standee outside where we've created a product called Gavel, which is an IT operation and analytics tool. And one of the largest companies in the world are going to use that as a component of their operations and management suite. This from an organization which for the last 8-9 years largely focused on supporting a family lifestyle and supporting resource management system. And therefore, more and more, if every one of us, at least the banks have an absolute governance that 20% of all banks need to do some work in the rural area before they're allowed a license in India. But for all of us, if some of us are getting into the private sector, it's extremely important that we have some of these drivers. And these drivers won't come from external imperatives. It ought to be from all of us wanting to be a Henry Ford, wanting to be a Steve Jobs, wanting to be someone who's made a disruption in their own lives. And of course, we talked about it here. I think Mr. Anurag Gupta was talking about this. And this was a fantastic data point. In Kenya, almost 68% of basic payments are being done through mobile phone. And that's some great data points that I was reading through on Africa. And they are entirely changing the concept the way we know it. And I'll stop here a little bit, and what I'm trying to do again in an organization which would and could help unorganized sector. Google does that in a big way. Google talks about this concept called 10x. I'd addressed some of you last month. I did talk about it. I'm trying to promote it. But Google is saying that if you largely look at evolution of innovation, you're going to make some change. From an iOS, from the Apple, you'll get an Android. But if you really want to do a disruption, you need to look at 10x. What Google is looking at, they're looking at balloons to provide internet presence in the rural area. This whole aspect of mobile technology with Google glasses is largely because they say mobile should be hands-free. And therefore, the entire footprint, the way we know it, ought to entirely change. And those are some of the ideas that they're looking at. The other thing that Google is doing, which we are again trying in some of our organization and portfolio company, they call it the 70-20-10 rule. 70 being 70% of all projects need to be related to the business of the organization or dedicated. 20% need to be related, and 10% should be unrelated to business. And that's really what we're doing in the private equity firm. I'll share that with you a little later. At Basil, as well as at Gavs and some of the other portfolio companies, we are more and more promoting one innovation. We are perpetually challenging ourselves to look at things differently. And that is the culture that I'm hoping that many of you will bring into the organizations that you go, or if you were a part of Gavs, that's what we'd be celebrating. And I believe that as leaders, we can perpetually talk about what the government is not doing. We can woe eloquent about the fact that skills are not happening. But let's look at our sphere of control, things that we can control, things that we can manage. And as digital leaders and business leaders, can we engender that kind of a change? And I believe that could happen if you were to bring in that cultural change. My favorite quotation is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that if we have a chance on bringing in genuine digitization in the unorganized sector and not just go ahead and replicate what Google, Android, or the Twitter or others are doing, that could really help. And for that, how many of you been following Israel? Do kind of Google this. There are 45 greatest inventions from Israel. And I think it's extremely, extremely important that we in India start replicating what they've been doing. What they've really done is they have taken some of their weaknesses, which is security, and they've identified and invested heavily in defense. And a lot of that has actually transcended into mainstream business. All our security products in the software industry, Checkpoint and others, have really come in from Israel. But more important, I don't know if some of you know, Intel 8088, which is the MX technology with Centrino technology, actually came in from Intel Israel. They had to really try and convince the folks in the Silicon Valley to try and adopt that. Subsequently, you have the pill cam. For any gastrointestinal problem, you have this pill, which is really a video recorder, and which kind of, once you ingest it, it's able to give you a whole host of data points as far as internal organs are concerned. There's a thing called drip technology, which is that whole drip irrigation where you have very precise, and you of course do city planning, you must be knowing more about it. In specially arid areas of Rajasthan and Gujarat and others, we could actually use drip technology, and we've been doing that. And that has again come in from Israel. There's this interesting theory again, that if a particular country has abundant resources, they become less hungry. So therefore, they tried that in Denmark. When they basically had no resources, they were absolutely coming up with great technology. Suddenly, when you found a whole host of natural resources in that part of the world, suddenly the innovation went down. And I think we have suffered from that in India. And in some way or form, as leaders, I would highly, highly urge you and encourage you to try and bring in some form of innovative model and try and disrupt it. And that's the only way we can really go after the unorganized sector. C.K. Prahlad, have you read C.K. Prahlad? He has this fantastic book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And then, of course, you have this book by Stuart L. Hart called The Capitalism at Crossroad. And both of them basically argue that it's extremely important now not to view the people at the unorganized sector or at the bottom of the pyramid as people who are victims. I think they don't need really our sympathy. What they are is they're extremely creative, which I think Mr. Praveen Khandelwal talked about. They're very resilient, and what they're really looking for are people where we could use them for services. I think Flipkart is doing that with the Dabbawalas, where there's a gentleman called Professor Anil Karnani, and he talks about that what you can really do is try and use technology as a supporting accompaniment to the unorganized sector, or what they call bottom of the pyramid sector. This is an interesting one, the Jaipur foot, which has, where normally a prosthetic limb in the US would cost something like $1,500 to $2,500, and we were able to invent this in Jaipur foot at $28. This, how many of you, I don't really want to regurgitate something that you know. This is extremely, extremely important. Mohanbir Soni from Northwestern Kellogg, he's written extensively about it. He had a concept called the Metacity. And based on that, ITC's, I think Mr. Shivakumar, he came up with eChopple. Some of you may know about that, which is they've managed to reduce the cost of soybean by around $5 per ton. On the other side, the total saving from ITC has been around $10 to $12 per ton. They have, and this is very interesting, they have not disintermediated the middleman. They've re-intermediated that. That is, they have someone called a sanchalak who takes care of the fact that some of the farmers could be illiterate. And therefore, if you bring in a sample of their crop, they are able to give them a particular quote on site. But I think eChopple is a fascinating thing that ITC has done, which is a direct testament to what digitization can do in the unorganized sector. I don't want to really repeat this. That didn't help. This is very interesting, and I've got it. Thanks. Some of you may know this. GE Wipro basically developed this bassinet, which is used to keep babies warm in the rural area. And we actually do some very interesting work with some large hospitals in the Bronx region. And there, the demographic and the price point of people are decidedly lower, almost low as some of our villages in India. And GE's managed to send some of this back to US. And that's a classic case of where we've taken some of our development in the unorganized sector and we can actually leverage that in Africa and in the US. This is interesting. Some of you know about this Airpur Village. This is very, very interesting. This is like that kid in class whom we don't like, who's a super achiever. Everything that they've done in this Gram Panchayat is great. They are able to go ahead and give you a certificate within 1 hour. Your death, birth, marriage certificate, anything, they're able to give it to you in an hour. All records are absolutely made available through a touch screen. They have 42 women's group who have won some major national awards, largely using digitization and doing some very lowbrow plantain or banana farming. And now what we are doing again, Basil, the private equity firm, we've actually adopted a village in the Western Ghats of India. And what we found that they have around 360 houses. And in spite of significant amount of rainfall, only 1/3 of it is within irrigation. So we've adopted that village. We're actually using technology there to try and enhance they have to walk around 3 kilometers for simple things like matchboxes and few others. And there, we're trying to create a holistic model to kind of support and sustain this village. And this village is, of course, called Ramanwadi, and that is clearly the CSR that Gabs and Basil has adopted, amongst few other things. But the reason I'm bringing this up is, again, very often when we were growing up, there was a huge divide between folks who were doing some altruistic work and generous work and business. I think Google does that, where their mission is do no wrong. Of course, Alphabet has a different mission right now. But more and more, many of my compatriots in the private equity world and in the business have decided that they have to give back something. It's not a patronizing point of view. We are clearly getting involved and supporting. And again, the intent being what Google talked about, that 70, 20, 10%. 10% of what we're now trying to do is entirely unrelated to what our business is. But what I'm trying to say is that more and more we're trying to create this culture of digitization where we want to support things around us. Yeah? And again, some of you may want to look at this Venu Madhuri project that we're supporting. Some of you already talked about, I know, book by buy and Quicker and all of this, which is more an aggregator. And I know some of your case studies supporting will basically be on these lines. And I really like what Micromax is doing. They could have jolly well focused on just a low cost, but I think their dual SIM, some of the newer concept and disruption that Micromax is bringing, in spite of the fact that you have the largest of the player in the mobile technology, is a classic case of them identifying how one can go into this whole aspect of unorganized sector and bring in some unique features. I think Captain Gopinath, again, we need to credit him. I think Air Deccan, the whole concept of ultra low cost carrier, ULCC, was largely pioneered by him. And of course, Kingfisher decided to do what they do best, is to muck it up. But that's really them. And of course, I think Nano, we all know about what Mr. Ratan Tata did in terms of looking at a family of 4 or 5 on a scooter precariously kind of navigating through the streets of Bombay, and that prompted him to look at Nano. And I think all of these are, so my humble request and to all my compatriots is, that's something that we need to look at. And more, very many of us who are, of course, decidedly older than all of you, that's where we are going. And if you can adopt that earlier, it'll really help your own cause and the organizations or the enterprise that you plan to lead or work with. And I think my favorite is always Henry David Thoreau. I end it that, of course, this is a different quotation, but my favorite quotation, of course, with which I like ending, is the most admirable quality in human being is to be able to elevate your life through sheer conscious endeavor. And I think if every one of us, and even if I'm able to relate to just 1 or 2 of you in line with what we are trying to do, or what you've done through organizing this, I think, and if you can start looking at our whole purpose of life differently, I think we've achieved what we set out to do. And then again, another thing that we started doing, you'll be very proud of this one. We have formed at Basil another group called Artha. Our whole belief is that industry leaders should not just be about wealth creation. And we've started creating this whole concept of what we call conscious leadership. And the idea being, including one of our founders at GAVS, that how is it that we can actually look at something different and using your wealth to directly impact folks. Like Basil, actually, we run a program called Anamrit, where we are feeding something like 1.6 million kids. It's a Government of India program. But we are actually supporting around 6,000 schools in the Bombay and the Maharashtra area, and we're supporting that. And again, our whole intent being that across the board within the organization, we're trying to do something different. And out here, you know of Mr. Agarwal of Vedanta. You can't go bigger than him. Apar Group, and we are actually sponsoring this. And that's why I was very keen to kind of even come and talk with you, that more and more the organizations that you're reaching out to have started looking at things differently. Yeah? And I think that's really it. And I'm conscious of your time, and that's why I decided to end it now. Yeah? Thank you much. A dichotomy there? Agreed, but you know what I've seen, and that's why I don't want to really take too much of time. Do look at this. This is a fantastic whole study on Africa and how mobile is really transplanting a lot of things that they're doing. I mean, frankly, the very fact that the overall cycle time to try and lay roads to get the amenities takes so much time, you can actually circumvent them using internet and technology. And that's working, that whole M-Pesa of digital payment. And if you step back a little, we often are guilty of being a little patronizing towards people. I mean, the whole aspect of adoption of mobile in India, it's absolutely eye-opening. And the fact that they're able to address that. What I'm trying to say is there's some reality, you're right, but we can't wait. And you and I don't know, I know you're a business leader. I don't know what's your role on technology. But as a technologist, you decide to stick to knitting. That instead of perpetually sitting and saying we're not skilled enough, or perpetually talking as an intellectual saying, gee, the whole scheme is wrong, or returning of rewards, can we go ahead and try and do within our realm something towards the unorganized sector? My only thesis being different, that I don't think we're doing them a favor. I think we are neglecting them to our own detriment. And that's why I started off with, would you and I not want to be known 200 years or 100 years later as the Henry Ford or someone else who has tried to create a disruption? And that's really how I'm looking at it. Yeah? Yes.
So you gave many examples about e-Chopal and AV Perrier. My question is, why don't we have many such examples? We have been hearing about e-Chopal from, I think I have heard in 2006, 2007.
2000.
So I don't see many such examples coming out, and I don't see any scalability. For example, AV Perrier, I don't see many other villages adopting those things. So why do you think that's happening?
Sure. Two, one again, I'm from the private sector. So I can only give you an opinion as a regular citizen. Unfortunately, I'm not a citizen of India either, but as a global citizen, I can answer. I think accountability becomes key. And I think it's happening. I mean, if you really step back, way back, I've worked very closely with McKinsey. The then Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh did some extensive amount of work with McKinsey way back 15, 17 years ago, where we took the case study. Initially, he tried to do Korea. And then he felt that Andhra was decidedly smaller than Korea, and they were way ahead. They then took Malaysia, took a case study of Malaysia, and tried to emulate that. Then, of course, droughts happened, and suicides of farmers happened, and he lost it. He started it, really, and then Mr. Modi did that. Then now I see Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bengal. I was in Kolkata recently. There's some movement happening. I think once accountability improves, there's ubiquity of information, they start getting rewarded for this, it's going to happen. And I think I am, again, as I said, a rational optimist, and I see some movement towards that. The next minute, again, what is happening in Bihar, I was extremely impressed with one of the chief ministers out there, and then he goes ahead and does an alliance with someone else, which represents everything that is not right with our country. So those situations are there, but I genuinely believe, and I liked what Mr. Mustafa has talked about, I think, and then just step back. As a private equity firm, our return on investment has been, IRR, has been 41%. We could have the old time, we could have jolly well stepped back and talked about other trappings, other things. More and more, the general partners are promoting this. My first email that, interestingly enough, there's a data that anyone from 18 to 34, within the first 24 minutes of growing up, looks at his mobile phone. Okay? In Africa, they watch it much earlier. The first email that I got from my partner in Singapore was about this the Artha Forum, where we managed to do it in the Bombay Stock Exchange, where we are talking about conscious leadership. So I think you're going to see more and more of that happening. And I strongly believe that change happens from one, and then we take it forward. Yeah? Good. Thank you much. Yeah?
Thanks, Sumit, for speaking about the importance of disruptive innovation.
Without breaking the law.
and not breaking the law. I'm sure we can't overemphasize the importance of information technology for innovation in both the organized and unorganized sector, which is the theme for the day.
Right.
So may I call upon Vani to please present the memento to you on behalf of IIM Bangalore.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.